Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when the air smelled like roasted spice. The streets echoed with the clink of copper trays, and coffee wasn't just a drink, it was a reason to gather, to whisper, to scheme, or just to sit still for once. You're in Ottoman Istanbul, centuries ago, long before alarm clocks and espresso machines, waking up in a courtyard tucked somewhere between the Bosphorus breeze and the call to prayer. It's early. The sky is still bruised with night. You lie on a low mattress beneath a lattice window, a thin blanket tangled around your legs. Somewhere nearby, a sleepy rooster tries and fails to sound majestic. You sit up slowly, blinking at the delicate gold light starting to seep into the mosaic tiles. The floor is cool. There's a fig tree just outside the archway, and someone's already hung out laundry, which is a bit optimistic considering it's barely dawn. Your nose twitches. The smell hits you before the sound's bitter, earthy, deep, not quite chocolate, not quite burnt. It's unmistakable. Coffee, or more accurately, kahve. The Ottomans didn't just drink it. They embraced it like a long-lost sibling, argued over it like politics, and served it with a level of ritual that would make your local barista cry from imposter syndrome. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the current time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rise and shuffle across the tiled floor, ducking through a pointed arch into a small stone courtyard. The morning is hushed, the kind of silence that only old cities know how to keep. A young boy with a red cap and arms full of bread loaves passes the gate. A cat yawns, stretches, and returns to its appointed sunlit patch. Someone hands you a cup without a word. A finjan small, handleless, hand-painted. You accept it with both hands because that's what feels right. Even though no one told you the rules, it's hot. You hesitate, watching the steam curl upward in lazy spirals. Then you sip. It's strong, thick, not bitter like modern espresso, but bold, syrupy, almost chewy. There's no sugar, no milk, just coffee as the universe intended it, full-bodied, slightly gritty, and capable of rewiring your neurons on the first sip. Your lips tingle, your shoulders drop. Somewhere between the dark roast and the rising sun, you feel yourself arriving. This is how a morning begins in Ottoman Istanbul. And make no mistake, it's not just about the caffeine. Kahve is a social experience, a statement, sometimes even a tiny act of rebellion. You're not drinking a beverage. You're entering a conversation that spans empires. The Ottomans first encountered coffee in the 16th century. They didn't invent it. That honor likely belongs to Sufi monks and goat herders further south, but they're the ones who made it fashionable, political, and sometimes even punishable. You lean against a carved column, cup in hand, listening as the city slowly wakes. Merchants clatter open their shutters. A man sweeps the steps of a mosque. The call to prayer lilts over the rooftops, low and musical, rippling across domes and minarets. Inside the house, a woman is grinding beans with a heavy brass mill. Shick, shick, shick. The rhythm is oddly soothing. She opens a small drawer at the bottom of the grinder and tips out a handful of dusty powder. Black as night, it smells intense, like secrets. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans were the first to roast coffee beans the way we recognize today, or if that innovation started in Yemen. What's agreed upon is that once the drink arrived in Istanbul, it caught on like wildfire, though a very refined, well-mannered wildfire served in porcelain. You finish your cup and hand it back. The grounds cling to the bottom in thick, swirled clumps. The woman glances into it and chuckles. "You'll fall in love before the week is out," she says with a wink. You're not sure if that's a threat or a promise. The cup is rinsed and placed carefully upside down on a saucer. not to be washed, to be read, but more on that later. For now, you wander toward the street, weaving through vendors setting up stalls. Someone's already selling tiny copper pots, czezve used to brew kave over coals. You pause to watch a vendor do just that, adding water, coffee, and sugar, if requested, into the pot, swirling it gently, then heating it until foam threatens to spill over the edge. No boiling, no rushing, just patience. And that's the key. Coffee, to the Ottomans, was about slowing down, about ceremony. Even law. There was once an official decree that if a husband failed to provide his wife with a daily supply of coffee, she had legal grounds for divorce. Yes, you heard that right. Forget flowers or diamonds, kave was sacred. The early morning breeze carries the scent of cardamom and roasted beans. Somewhere a scholar recites a poem about the moon being jealous of a woman's eyes. You spot a man sipping kave with one hand and feeding walnuts to a parrot with the other. And just like that, you've slipped into a world where coffee isn't background noise. It's the main character. You follow the scent of kave as it drifts down a narrow alley, past wooden shutters just beginning to creak open. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick from the morning dew or possibly the spilled ambitions of last night's tavern-goers. Either way, you tread carefully. Your second cup of coffee hasn't hit yet. At the alley's end, you find yourself standing before a tiny stall with hanging copper pots and jars of what look like crushed spices, though you're told they're different grades of coffee, some powdered so fine they'd vanish in a breeze, others coarse enough to crunch between your teeth. Behind the counter, an old man with a braided white beard motions for you to sit. He hands you another finjan. This one is cracked slightly at the rim, stained with decades of stories. You sip again, more confidently this time. Grit clings to your teeth, but you don't mind. You've crossed over. You're one of them now. But how did they get it, coffee? After all, didn't exactly grow in the shadow of Topkapi Palace. You lean back as the man launches into a tale that, frankly, sounds partly made up. But that's the thing with coffee lore. Half of it's history. The other half is just excellent storytelling. Somewhere in the mix, truth percolates through. Coffee's roots trace back to Ethiopia, where legend says a goat herd named Kaldi noticed his goats dancing after nibbling bright red berries. Skeptical but curious. He tried some himself and was promptly inspired to open history's first goat-themed dance studio. Okay, maybe not quite, but he did, supposedly, bring the beans to local monks who discovered they helped them stay awake during long, chant-heavy nights. Cue the first all-night espresso prayer party. From there, coffee traveled east into Yemen, where Sufi mystics found it particularly handy for staying alert during devotional ceremonies. The Ottomans, always keeping a shrewd eye on trade and trends, got their first taste in the early 1500s when beans arrived through the bustling port of Mocha. Yes, that Mocha. Historians still argue whether it was Ottoman traders, pilgrims returning from Mecca, or enterprising smugglers who first brought coffee into Istanbul. What's agreed upon is that once it arrived, it did not go quietly. Within a few decades, coffee had vaulted from obscure foreign stimulant to the center of social and spiritual life in the empire. The man across from you grins. They say the first cups were drunk by scholars who believed it brought clarity of mind, then by poets who said it made their verses burn brighter. He pauses for effect, then by politicians who simply liked being awake when everyone else was asleep. You raise your cup in silent salute. Sounds familiar. Back then, beans came through trade routes guarded fiercely by Yemeni merchants who wanted to keep the market tight. In fact, the Ottomans once tried to grow their own trees in secret, but with little luck. You imagine a bored sultan glaring at a very leafy but utterly beanless shrub. Not ideal. Eventually, coffee found itself sailing across the Red Sea, carried in caravans and on ships bound for the empire's coffee-hungry elite, and from there, it exploded. There's a brief moment where you wonder what it was like before coffee. Did people just fall asleep mid-conversation? Were meetings mercifully shorter? Did anyone get anything done before noon? Beside you, the old man chuckles again, as if reading your mind. They didn't talk this much before coffee. That's the difference. You glance around. A young girl is delivering cups to a nearby embroidery shop. Two elderly men in robes are deep in debate, though whether it's about poetry or plumbing, you can't quite tell. A musician tunes a lute in the corner while balancing a saucer on his knee. And everywhere kava, cups held delicately, protectively, like little lamps for the soul. In a corner of the stall, you notice something peculiar, a worn wooden box filled with what look like passports, except they're stamped leather notebooks, each filled with names, dates, and scribbled notes. These, the man explains, are coffee ledgers, credit tabs, regulars who drink more than they pay but always settle before Ramadan. He pats one affectionately. This one owes me 40 cups, says he's good for it. It hits you. Then coffee isn't just a drink here. It's a relationship. Between neighbors, vendors, cities, between you and the stranger who just gave you his last clean cup. You finish yours and rise slowly. The alley is warmer now, the early sun casting long golden beams through the wooden slats. The old man waves you off with a lazy flick of the wrist and a quiet Afiyet Olsun, the Ottoman version of enjoy. You nod, pocketing the warmth of that phrase like a coin. Down the street, the clatter of more stalls opening calls you onward. But in the back of your mind, you're already craving the next cup, not for the caffeine, for the hush it brings, the rhythm, the way it asks the world to pause with you, just for a while. You meander down the narrow street, dodging a donkey cart here, a sleepy water cellar there, and find yourself in a livelier part of town. The rooftops above you lean inward like they're sharing secrets, and below, the smell of bread mingles with roasting beans. People are fully awake now, some cheerful, some clearly on their third café of the morning. You pass a spice stall, then a bookbinder's shop, until something glints in your peripheral vision. Not gold, not copper, something darker, richer. You turn. A young boy, no older than 12, is arranging what looks like a basket of charred cherries. Except they're not fruit. They're green coffee beans, freshly roasted, still smoking slightly. You approach just as his father steps out. He smiles, wipes his hands on his robe, and invites you in with the confidence of a man who believes coffee is the answer to most questions. You step inside their workshop, half storage room, half laboratory. Bags of beans, bricks of dried herbs, copper sesvies hanging like musical instruments. Ethiopian, he says, pointing to a large burlap sack. Yemeni? To another. Ottoman, you ask. He grins. Imported taste? Imperial flair? What follows is part science, part theater. He lays a handful of green beans into a shallow metal pan and holds it over hot coals, turning them constantly with a small paddle. The beans pop, hiss, darken. The air thickens with scent. You lean in and almost get a nose full of steam. You pretend that didn't happen. As he roasts, he talks. The story of coffee's journey to the Ottoman Empire is full of detours and betrayals. Initially, the beans were guarded like treasure. Yemen tried to prevent the export of viable seeds by parboiling or roasting them before trade. But as with anything delicious, someone always finds a loophole. According to one tale, an Indian Sufi named Baba Budan smuggled 7 raw coffee seeds out of Yemen in the 1600s, hidden in his beard. Yes, his beard. Historians still argue whether this story is fact or fanciful beard propaganda. But regardless, the seeds supposedly made it to India and helped break Yemen's bean monopoly. The Ottomans, for their part, weren't content to be just middlemen. They opened trade routes, sweet-talked or conquered ports, and established coffee as a commodity. Over time, it became deeply woven into their urban identity. By the time the father finishes roasting, the beans are dark and oily. He pours them into a grinder and begins the shik 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 ritual. You watch, hypnotized. A fine powder collects in the base like the sands of a very caffeinated hourglass. He spoons some into a sesve, adds water and sugar just a little, and sets it over the coals. The foam rises slowly. The tension builds. Then, just before it boils, he lifts it off. He repeats this 3 times, like a magician whispering spells. Finally, he pours it into a cup and hands it to you. You sip, even better than before, somehow richer, smoother. The sediment is less aggressive. You nod in silent respect. First time he asks, you shake your head. Third, he chuckles. Still early. Then, outside, the boy is repacking beans into little paper cones, ready for market. He offers you one as a souvenir. You take it, tucking the warm cone into your robe like a secret. As you step back into the sunlight, it hits you again how far this little bean has traveled across deserts, oceans, empires, stirred into the hearts of cities, into the pulse of daily life. The street ahead opens onto a plaza where a small crowd is gathered around a man on a stool, gesturing wildly with one hand and clutching a finjan in the other. He's telling a story, something about a sultan, a camel, and a pot of coffee that refused to boil. The audience laughs. You do too, even though you miss the setup. This isn't just a drink. It's infrastructure. It's economy. It's performance art. A historian might call it the social lubricant of empire. But let's be real. It's the reason these people function before noon. You pause under an awning, watching as a caravan from Anatolia arrives. Its camels trotting in dusty rhythm. Among the cargo, more beans. Some roasted, some raw, some flavored with clove or cardamom. Coffee didn't just arrive in the Ottoman world. It got adopted, curated, roasted, literally and culturally, into something unique. Something Ottoman. And even today, historians squabble over whether the empire's love for coffee made it stronger or distracted it from more serious affairs, which is adorable, as if anything's more serious than a perfect cup. You watch the caravan disappear down a street lined with domes and latticed windows, the sunlight flickering like candlelight off tiled rooftops. Another sip, another pause, another tiny piece of history dissolved into your bloodstream. You're pulled forward by a strange rhythm, not drums, not voices, but something deeper, a slow pulse in the ground, a kind of trance humming through the alleys. You follow it, turning instinctively, until the city's bustle softens behind you and the stone walls narrow into quiet. The sound grows clearer chants, echoing, layered like smoke. You've stumbled upon a techie, a Sufi lodge, and if the rising scent of cardamom-laced coffee is any clue, you've arrived just in time for the zikr ceremony. A man in a long, bright, dark robe stands at the gate. He looks you up and down, not unkindly, and then opens the door without a word. You step inside. The interior is simple woven carpets, aged wood beams, an air of sacred calm. But it's the people that draw your gaze. Half a dozen men, seated in a circle, swaying gently. A few younger initiates to one side, preparing trays of you guessed it, kave. The room vibrates with repetition. Words you don't quite understand, repeated and repeated until their meaning melts and only sound remains. This is zikr, the remembrance of God. And for centuries, Sufi orders used it to connect more deeply with the divine. But here's the twist: that connection was often fueled by coffee. Not just used, celebrated. The Sufis were among the earliest and most enthusiastic adopters of coffee in the Islamic world. To them, kave wasn't a distraction. It was a bridge, something that sharpened the mind and softened the soul. The drink kept them awake for long. Ecstatic nights of prayer and chanting. A spiritual espresso shot, if you will. One of the younger disciples offers you a cup. You take it quietly. Even the clink of porcelain feels like an interruption here. You sip. The coffee is spiced, this time tinged with cardamom and a whisper of cinnamon. It glides down your throat like warm silk and settles somewhere between your ribs. Around you, the chants deepen. Bodies sway in unison. The rhythm accelerates, then decelerates, then blooms again like breath. Historians still argue whether the Sufi embrace of coffee was purely practical or deeply symbolic. Some say it was just an alertness aid. Others insist it represented the bitterness of spiritual truth and the warmth of divine love in one cup. You just know it works. As the ritual winds down, the disciples begin serving a second round. This one's sweeter, almost syrupy. You're invited to sit with them. The leader of the lodge leans in and begins to tell stories not from books, but from memory. He tells of Yemen, where Sufi mystics first roasted beans over open flames and brewed them in large clay pots. He talks of dervishes who traveled for days just to drink kahve with a particular teacher, of a time when coffee was called kahwa al-Sufiya, the Sufi's wine. You learn that the very word kahwa, which originally meant wine in Arabic, was reimagined to fit this new, sober devotion, a wine of the soul, not the body. A few chuckles break the reverent mood when someone spills their second cup, and an elder scolds him with mock severity. You've just lost your blessings for the day. The room laughs gently. You sip again, feeling the warmth spread, not just from the liquid, but from the room itself, the camaraderie, the shared stillness. The leader reaches into a carved box and pulls out an old, worn manuscript. No title on the cover, just a symbol inked in black, a steaming cup with a crescent moon above it. He opens it and begins reading a poem. Not loudly, not theatrically, just enough. A verse about coffee that compares it to the night sky dark, infinite, filled with constellations of meaning. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of his voice and the last sip of kave settle into you like sediment. You're not just watching history, you're drinking it. Eventually, the gathering disperses. People stand, stretch, bow to one another with quiet grace. You thank the host with a gesture, and he returns it with a smile that feels like a benediction. Back outside, the light has changed. The day is fully awake now. The sounds of merchants and children spill back into your ears, but something in you has shifted. You glance down at your empty cup, then tuck it carefully into your bag. You may never find this exact lodge again, but you'll carry the flavor of it for a long, long time. And the next time someone tells you coffee is just a drink, you'll remember a circle of chanting men, a steaming cup, and a silence so rich it needed no sugar at all. The city is fully alive now, humming like a hive. You rejoin the flow of Istanbul's streets, where horses clatter, peddlers bark out rhymes, and every fourth person seems to be holding a cup. But this time, you're not heading to another quiet courtyard or spiritual retreat. You're going to a Cavahane. Not just any coffee house, the first ones. Back when the idea of sitting publicly to sip a hot, dark beverage while arguing about philosophy was brand new and slightly scandalous. Think less Starbucks, more smoky Renaissance salon with a side of political chaos. You round a corner and spot the place easily. It's not marked by a sign, but by sound bursts of laughter, the thud of backgammon pieces, a recitation of poetry loud enough to startle a pigeon. Inside, the air is thick with conversation and the unmistakable scent of burnt sugar and roasted beans. There are no tables, just low wooden platforms lined with cushions, trays resting on stools, and clusters of men lost in loud, caffeinated debate. You spot a pipe or two, a lute being lazily strummed, and one guy gesturing with such passion he nearly flings his entire cup. You slide onto a cushion and quickly realize no one here is quiet. This isn't a place for contemplative sipping. It's a verbal battlefield. The cave is served strong and unsweetened because sweet is for the faint-hearted and undecided. Someone hands you a cup without even looking. Drink, then speak. They say, "So you do," and then you listen. The conversation darts from theology to chess to whether the Sultan should build another palace or fix the city's crumbling aqueducts. From marriage customs to military campaigns to the scandalous rumor that one vizier was caught adding rose water to his coffee. Gasps all around. You're not surprised to learn that these early coffee houses sparked real worry among the powers that be. They were hubs of free thought, always dangerous in any era. The Grand Vizier at one point even ordered raids. Sultans issued decrees banning coffee houses outright, calling them dens of sedition and idle chatter. That's probably the most flattering review any social space could ask for. Historians still argue whether the first Ottoman coffee house was in Istanbul or Damascus, or whether it even deserved to be called a coffee house by today's standards. What's clear is that once the idea took root, communal public spaces centered entirely around a drink that made you more alert, it spread like wildfire. A wiry man with stained fingers slams a backgammon piece down and shouts, "If coffee be the drink of clarity, then let us see clearly abolish taxes on honey." It's unclear whether this is serious policy or caffeine-fueled performance art, but either way, the room cheers. You sip again. The kava here is rougher than what you had in the Sufi lodge. Grainier, slightly bitter, but no less sacred. It's the kind of brew meant to accompany big ideas and bigger egos. In the corner, a young man recites verses from memory epic poems about lost lovers, heroic battles, and a surprisingly long section about how difficult it is to grind coffee evenly with a dull pestle. You begin to realize this is where culture is made, not in palaces, but in rooms like this, over drinks like this, with people like these. You catch a whispered conversation behind you. Two men, seated closely, speaking too softly to hear clearly. Every so often, one of them glances toward the door. You don't need to understand the words to recognize conspiracy when you hear it. In the world of the Kavahane, everyone is someone. A baker might be debating a judge. A student could be scolding a scholar. A merchant might offer financial advice no one asked for. Titles are checked at the door. What matters here is wit, not wealth. A server weaves through the cushions with a copper tray, refilling cups without asking. You try to wave him off, foolish. He returns anyway, pours, and walks on. You drink, now too invested to refuse. The line between guest and regular blurs fast in a place like this. You glance around and wonder how many revolutions were whispered over cave like this. How many poems born, laws challenged, friendships made or broken. One elderly man raises his cup toward the ceiling and says, "To the bean that birthed 1,000 arguments." The room applauds, someone slaps a drum, and a spontaneous rhyme-off begins in the back. And just as suddenly, the noise dips, not to silence, but to that late afternoon murmur. The caffeine is waning. Arguments are looping back on themselves. The backgammon players now care more about shade than winning. You rise, quietly thanking your hosts. Someone waves you back in, but you've had your fill. For now. Outside, the city feels different, like it has depth. Not just marble and domes, but ideas, risks, stories that live in noisy rooms and cling to your clothes like the scent of roasted beans. Your cup is empty, but your head is buzzing, not just from the kava, but from everything you just saw, the laughter, the fire, the fellowship. In the Ottoman Empire, the coffee house wasn't just where you got your daily dose of energy, it was where you got your daily dose of humanity. You step into the shadows beneath a tall arcade, the chaos of the coffee house still buzzing faintly in your bones. But here, the atmosphere changes. It's quieter, sharper. The scent of polished tile and damp paper replaces roasted beans. You're entering palace territory now. You've wandered into the bureaucratic heart of the empire, where even the smallest tremors of public life are felt and monitored. The gossip from Cavahanes doesn't just stay in smoky rooms, it travels. Up staircases, through secret courtyards, into the ears of very alert officials holding very tiny cups of kava. It's a strange contrast. The drink that powers the people also fuels the power that watches them. You're ushered into a shaded pavilion where a low-ranking vizier, his robe too clean to trust fully, motions for you to sit. He offers you coffee with a half-smile that says welcome, and I'm observing you in equal parts. The cup is perfect, not too hot, foam just right, sweetened slightly, as befits his rank. You nod appreciatively, and he nods back, as if you've passed a test you didn't know you were taking. As you sip, he speaks, not of coffee, but of control. You see, coffee was a double-edged cup for the Ottoman elite. On one hand, it brought people together, soothed tempers, encouraged conversation, and made mornings productive. On the other hand, it brought people together and gave them ideas. The first coffeehouse ban in Istanbul came in the 16th century under Sultan Murad III, who feared that these gathering places were less about kave and more about conspiracies. And, honestly, he wasn't wrong. Historians still argue whether the bans were about morality, since some coffeehouses also dabbled in music, gambling, and the occasional risque verse, or about politics, places where commoners could, for the price of a single cup, question the fate of an empire. Some bans were gentle just warnings. Others involved soldiers storming coffeehouses, smashing cups, and hurling sezvis into the street. Legend has it that in one particularly strict era, drinking kave in public could result in a beating or worse, but the people kept sipping. And rather poetically, so did the palace. You're escorted deeper into the complex, into the Enderun, the palace school. There, in a high-ceilinged room filled with maps and silent scribes, another tray of coffee arrives, this time carried by a boy who can't be more than 10, dressed in crisp silks and already better mannered than you've ever been in your life. A tutor leans over a scroll, sipping slowly as he reviews reports from distant provinces. "Coffee," he mutters, not looking up, makes even boring governors interesting. You believe him? Here, kave is not served casually. It's prepared with precision. The Kahvechibasha, chief coffee maker to the Sultan, was a real palace title, a prestigious one at that. This man didn't just boil beans, he managed supplies, curated blends, and could be trusted with state secrets, or at least with the Sultan's afternoon. In some reigns, the Kahvechibasha wielded more influence than generals. After all, if you control the Sultan's coffee, you control the Sultan's mood. That's a dangerous kind of power, one that doesn't come with armor, but with aroma. You pause in a marble courtyard, watching a servant grind beans with such focus it might as well be surgery. Each movement is deliberate. The sezve is warmed, not scorched. The water is poured in a spiral. The heat is applied in pulses. Nothing bubbles over. And always, the presentation, silver tray, embroidered napkin, sweet delight on the side, maybe a sliver of locum, maybe a candied rose petal, because when you serve power, aesthetics matter. A young courtier appears beside you, sipping slowly and whispering, "The Sultan once rejected a cup because the foam had sunk." He looks grave. The Kahvechibasha lost his post by sunset. You suspect the story is exaggerated. Then again, this is the same empire where officials might be promoted one day and strangled with a silk cord the next. A sunken foam doesn't seem like much of a stretch. As you move through the palace, you notice that kave follows you, in a scribe's inkwell tray, on a low table beside a map of Egypt, on a windowsill overlooking the Bosphorus, where a janissary leans quietly, watching ships pass and letting his coffee go cold. Even in silence, it's never forgotten. You begin to see how the empire ran not just on laws and armies, but on ritual, on rhythm. And coffee was rhythm in a cup morning, afternoon, dusk, a steady drip of focus in a world that rarely stopped moving. Eventually, you find yourself in a quiet antechamber just beyond the Sultan's private quarters. No one speaks here. Even the footsteps are soft. You're served a final cup smaller than the rest, impossibly delicate. It's almost black, the surface like a mirror. You sip, and everything slows. You taste smoke, cloves, something floral, something bitter. Power tastes like this, you think? As you set the cup down, a servant takes it and vanishes like a ghost. You're left alone in the hush, the echo of your footsteps following you out through the garden and back toward the city. Outside the palace gates, the noise rushes back in. Laughter, bells, the call of vendors, a whiff of frying onions. You exhale. In the Ottoman Empire, even paranoia had a flavor, and that flavor, more often than not, was coffee. You blink against the midday sun, leaving behind the polished stillness of the palace. The street heat hits you like a fresh-baked brick, and suddenly you're thirsty again. Not for water, for something darker, steamier, and a little more dangerous. The city hums, unaware or uncaring of palace anxieties. But if the upper echelons were uneasy about kave, the streets had already chosen their side, and that side was more beans, please. You drift into a quieter neighborhood where the coffee houses are less grand, less polished, more human. No embroidered napkins, no silver trays, just creaky wooden stools, chipped cups, and people sipping side by side, telling stories they probably shouldn't. This is where things get murky. You slide into a small cave-hane tucked between a barber and a blacksmith. There's a back room not hidden, exactly, but not advertised. You get waved in like someone who's been here before, and maybe you have, in a dream or a déjà vu. It's darker here, thick with smoke, not from tobacco, no hookahs today, but from the fire underneath a bubbling kesvi that's seen better centuries. The walls are covered in newspaper scraps and flyers, written in the kind of Ottoman calligraphy that makes every word look like a minor revolution. A man leans toward you, whispering through the steam. This place? This is where we dream up trouble. You sip your coffee, thick, unsweetened, defiant. In the 17th century, gatherings like this were common and dangerous. As coffee spread, so did ideas. Free thinking, dissent, all served with foam on top. Rebels, poets, even ex-janissaries would sit in rooms just like this and plan their return to power or their dramatic exit. Some wore disguises, others didn't care. The authorities knew what these meetings were, and sometimes they didn't bother to raid them, until they did. Historians still argue whether the bans and crackdowns were genuinely about protecting public order, or simply pretexts to squash movements before they grew too bold. After all, it's harder to keep people in line when they're wide awake and freshly caffeinated. You sip again. It's bitter, earthy, with a hint of something metallic. Maybe from the sesvi, maybe from the treason. Someone near the corner is sketching something, a caricature of a government official, holding a spoon instead of a sword, weeping over a spilled cup. Everyone laughs quietly. This is how coffee got political. Not by accident, by necessity. When taverns were outlawed for being un-Islamic, coffee houses became their replacement. But instead of numbing the senses, kave sharpened them. People didn't stagger out of these places they marched. It's no wonder the authorities called them schools of sedition. Where else could a tailor debate a theologian? Where else could someone from the provinces sit beside a veteran and compare notes on injustice. One anecdote you hear between sips: a satirical play was once performed using coffee cups as characters. The Sultan was portrayed by a chipped finjan, the Grand Vizier by a cracked saucer. The plot, a poorly brewed kahva, leads to chaos in the empire. It was, reportedly, a hit. The man beside you leans in again. "This cup," he says, swirling his kave, "has seen more conspiracies than the palace guards." He taps the rim. It's the loudest silence in Istanbul. You believe him. The room shifts. Someone arrives with news. A governor was replaced. A fatwa was issued. A shipment of beans from Mocha was delayed, catastrophic. Whispers buzz. Decisions are made. Not big ones, just new ones. Fresh opinions. An evolution of thought, all while sipping quietly in the corner of a shadowed room. And there, nestled in the folds of this smoky back room, you realize coffeehouses were never just recreational. They were operational. They were the newsrooms, parliaments, classrooms, and lounges of their time. They were universities without tuition, protests without banners, friendships without filters. You sip again, slower now. Your cup is nearly empty, but your mind is full. In the far corner, someone tells a joke about the kavechibasha being replaced by a goat with better taste in beans. The room erupts in laughter, quiet, but real. You laugh too, wiping your mouth on your sleeve and thinking this is where empires turn in their sleep. Eventually, you rise. The shadows outside are longer now, and the breeze carries the scent of roasted chestnuts and dust. You step out, blink in the light, and find the world unchanged. And yet, not. You felt something shift, not on the streets, in your bloodstream, in the places where coffee has mingled with thought and left behind a residue of revolution. As you walk, your cup in hand, you feel oddly hopeful, not because everything's perfect, but because, somewhere out there, someone's about to brew another batch and ask, what if we did things differently? And then they'll sip. The air cools slightly as you make your way down from the more rebellious corners of the city into a bustling market district. It's not palace quiet or backroom conspiratorial. It's loud, earthy, honest, the kind of place where a merchant might try to sell you both coffee beans and a parrot in the same breath. Here, the pulse of kava feels different, less sacred, less subversive. It's ordinary, and that, somehow, makes it even more powerful. You pass a cloth vendor, then a candied fruit stall, and spot a simple wooden awning where the crowd is gathering. There's a man brewing kave in 6 sezvis at once, not breaking eye contact with the customer he's arguing with about the price of dried apricots. You step in line. It's not a fancy establishment. A charcoal stove, some brass trays, mismatched cups. But the smells, the smells hit you like an embrace roasted beans, sugar syrup, rose water, maybe even a hint of orange peel. This is coffee as sustenance, as social glue, as the background hum of daily life. You're waved forward by a woman in her 50s with forearms like rolling pins and a laugh like thunder. Sugar, she asks, eyeing you like she's testing your character. You nod once, respectfully. She approves, barely. You take your cup to a bench, wedging yourself between 2 older men in dusty turbans who don't pause their conversation as you sit. One of them gestures to your cup. His is better, he says, jerking a thumb at the other. Mine will make your hair fall out. You nod solemnly, then I'll drink both and see which one wins. They like you now. This, you realize, is the beating heart of Ottoman coffee culture, not the palaces, not the Sufi lodges, not the revolutionary dens, but these shared corners where nobody's famous and everybody's welcome. The kava here is bold and faintly sweet, served with a square of a locum dusted in powdered sugar that immediately attaches itself to your robe forever. You eat it anyway. As you sip, you notice the customers: a tailor on break, a blacksmith's apprentice with singed sleeves, a man selling onions out of a basket. They sit, sip, swap stories. Nobody's in a rush. This is how gossip travels. News, too. In an empire the size of half a continent, word of mouth is faster than couriers. And coffee houses, whether grand or humble, are the switchboards. One man recounts news from Damascus. Another mentions his cousin in Salonika, who says the Sultan's new vizier is all mustache. No brain. Everyone chuckles. You chuckle too, partly out of politeness, partly because you believe it. Historians still debate whether these marketplaces and everyday coffee stalls had real influence on politics, or if they were just spaces to blow off steam. But even the silliest conversations shape public thought. A joke today is an opinion tomorrow. A group of young boys runs by, laughing, chasing a cat who's made off with something pink and sticky. The cat wins, as always. The woman behind the stall slaps the counter and calls for another round. More cups appear. No one says no. You realize, somewhere in your third sip, that nobody is talking about coffee itself. They just drink it. It's woven into the fabric of their afternoon like thread into cloth. Ooh. A man beside you leans over, eyes twinkling. You know, he says, they used to say the best coffee could make a man weep. You nod. Because of the flavor? He grins. No, because it meant he had time to sit and drink it. You think about that. Time, after all, is the real luxury. And coffee in the Ottoman world wasn't just about the taste. It was about permission to pause, to listen, to share, whether in velvet-draped rooms or next to a crate of onions. In the distance, a muezzin begins the late afternoon call to prayer. The conversation dips, but no one stands yet. Not out of disrespect, just an understanding that there's time for reverence and time for resting your bones before the walk home. You linger a little longer, watching the shadows lengthen across the dusty stones. There's a boy wiping down trays, a girl bringing out new cups, and always the soft clink of sezvis, like distant chimes. As you rise to leave, the woman behind the counter hands you a small pouch of ground beans. Yours now, she says. Don't mess it up. You nod, thanking her, tucking the pouch into your bag. You'll probably never brew it quite like she does, but that's not the point. You walk away slowly, your footsteps carrying the rhythm of the marketplace, the residue of coffee and laughter still warm on your tongue. In the great machinery of empire, the gears are oiled not just with gold or laws, but with coffee shared between strangers. The sun dips low now, casting warm gold across the rooftops, and the city begins to shift again. You've wandered into a quieter lane, and as your feet grow sore and your satchel heavy with the weight of gifted beans, you start to wonder, how do they make this stuff taste the way it does? Because it isn't just good, it's precise. So you do what any rational person in the Ottoman Empire would do. You follow your nose to the back of a shop where a man is roasting, grinding, and brewing kave like he's casting spells. He doesn't speak at first, just gestures you in. The room is small, full of shadows and clanking tools. Bags of green coffee beans sit in the corner like lazy giants. On the hearth, a long-handled sezvi simmers gently over embers, the foam just threatening to rise. The man finally speaks. Most people think it's the beans, or the pot, but it's the fire. He stirs, never taking his eyes off the sezve. Too hot, and you burn the soul out of it. Too cold, and it dies before it lives. You nod slowly, as though you understand, even though you absolutely don't. But the coffee smells amazing. He begins to explain. The process starts with roasting slowly, in a wide, flat pan over open heat. Some use wood, some use charcoal, but never rush it. The color must be even, the aroma full. Roast too long and you get ash, too short and you get hay. Then, the grind. A brass mill, hand-cranked. No shortcuts. The goal is a powder so fine it clings to your fingertips. Some joke that the best grind is so fine, it can bribe a judge without being seen. He hands you a small copper grinder. You turn the handle, and it feels like trying to drill through silk. Takes longer than people expect, he says. But then again, everything worth drinking does. Once ground, the powder is spooned into a kesve with cold water. Sugar, if requested, goes in now, not later. It must cook with the coffee. You watch him measure precisely, not with spoons, but with gestures of flick, a pinch, a tilt of the wrist. The kesve is placed over low heat. No flames, just coals. The foam begins to rise. He removes it, lets it settle, then places it back 3 times. No shortcuts. Each time the foam grows, and each time it's pulled away before it breaks. Historians still argue whether this triple foam method began in Istanbul or earlier in Cairo, but most agree the Ottomans perfected it. They made it into a ritual, a choreography of patience. The final pour is slow. The foam divides evenly into each cup. No stirring, no sloshing. Let the grounds settle naturally at the bottom, like dreams beneath the surface. You take the cup he offers. It's smoother than any before, silky, warm, a little smoky, and behind the boldness, something subtle, floral. Maybe you don't ask. He wouldn't tell you anyway. Each kesve is different. He murmurs, like people, same shape, same function, but one day it boils over. The next, it whispers. In a dusty corner, he shows you other brewing tools, an antique grinder that once belonged to a Janissary commander, a kesve said to have survived a fire in Izmir, an ivory-handled scoop reserved for special guests, though it hasn't been used in years. And then, quietly, he reaches beneath a cloth and pulls out a tray of tiny porcelain cups, finjans. Each is slightly different. The best ones, he says, aren't perfect. They leak stories. You sip again, letting the science of it all dissolve into silence. It's easy to forget how much work lives behind each tiny cup, how much history, how much heat, risk, repetition, and revision. Outside, the street begins to dim. Lanterns flicker to life. You hear the faint clatter of horses, the soft bark of a street dog defending its corner. The man doesn't say goodbye when you leave. He just nods. You nod back. That's all that's needed. You walk away with the taste of mastery on your tongue and a deeper respect for the alchemy behind the everyday. Because while anyone can drink coffee, few truly make it. And even fewer understand that making kava, in the Ottoman sense, was never just about ingredients. It was about intent. Every detail mattered. Every step whispered a story. Every sip, a sermon. And you, lucky soul, just attended the quietest lecture in the empire delivered by fire and written in steam. By now, you've had so much coffee that time itself feels a little bendy. The sun is soft on your shoulders. Your fingers smell faintly of brass and sugar. And your breath is about 30% caffeine. But before the day fades, there's one last ritual you're invited to, perhaps the most curious of all. Coffee as fortune? You're led by a giggling teenage girl through a series of archways to a rooftop terrace where the wind smells of roses and smoke. You think you're just here for another cup. But oh no, this is about the bottom of the cup, the mysterious, murky, slightly mystical sludge at the end of every finjan. Here, in the Ottoman tradition, your kave is more than a beverage. It's a divination tool. You're sat down gently. Cushions are fluffed. A tray appears, delicately arranged coffee, a glass of water, and 2 squares of delight dusted in powdered sugar that seem genetically engineered to stick to your sleeve forever. You accept your fate and your sweets. The woman who joins you is middle-aged, veiled in gauze, eyes sharp enough to cut marble. She says little, just nods, places the cup in front of you, and waits. You drink slowly, leaving just a ring of sludge. She takes the cup, places the saucer on top, flips it smoothly, and sets it aside to cool. The whole thing clinks like a tiny bell that signals the start of something vaguely magical. "Now we wait," she says, folding her hands. You don't speak, neither does she. There's a breeze, distant seagulls. Somewhere a lute strums the same 3 notes it's been playing all week. The cup cools, and something about it feels oddly sacred. She lifts it gently, tilts it toward the light, and peers inside like a sorcerer consulting a very muddy crystal ball. Historians still argue where this practice began. Some trace it to ancient Babylonian oil readings. Others believe it emerged alongside the rise of coffee itself, with Ottoman women leading the tradition in both private homes and public baths. Wherever it started, it quickly became the way to add drama to your post-caffeine lull. Your reader murmurs. She sees paths, branches, a bird, something that might be a snake or possibly a very tired horse. Her brows knit. "You travel too much," she says. "Your shoes are restless." You glance at your sandals, which have indeed seen better cobblestones. There is love, but it hides behind a gate. Ah, the classics. You're tempted to ask what kind of gate, but you wisely stay quiet. "A fish," she adds. "Big, eyes wide open. That's good. That's money." You nod solemnly, pretending this is all totally normal and not the caffeinated cousin of tarot cards. But still, you look. You really look. And yes, you can see it. A fish, or at least a blob with conviction. She points to a swirl. This is the letter M, or maybe W. Someone important to you. You whisper, "My cousin Waleed." She nods like she expected that. It goes on like this for a while. Shapes, signs, silences, and it's oddly calming. Because whether or not the universe is whispering to you through espresso sludge, someone is paying attention. Someone is holding your story, even if just for a few sips. In Ottoman homes, especially among women, this ritual was more than novelty. It was communion, a way to talk, to share, to hint at things unsaid under the guise of swirling symbols. In some households, no gathering was complete without a round of readings and the occasional gasp at a particularly ominous-looking spiral. Some families even had designated readers: an aunt, a grandmother whose reputation for spotting camels or coins in coffee grounds was the stuff of legend. You ask your reader how long she's been doing this. She smiles. Long enough to know most fortunes sound better after dessert. Fair? You finish your water. She flips the cup once more, eyes it a final time, and then sets it down with a soft tap. Done. "You'll be fine," she says. "Just don't spill anything this week." You thank her with genuine warmth, not just for the reading, but for the quiet space it created. A pause after all your wandering. A moment where time circled the rim of a tiny cup. As you leave the terrace, you glance at your own cup. Just a pattern of blotches now. But somehow, it feels like a map. A very messy, poetic, possibly fish-themed map. You tuck it in your memory with all the others. The marketplace cup, the Sufi cup, the palace cup, and now your fortune cup. Because in the Ottoman world, coffee wasn't just something you drank. It was something you finished carefully, hopefully, and maybe, just maybe, with a fish-shaped future waiting at the bottom. Twilight is settling in now, casting soft purples and burnt oranges across the sky as minarets cut their familiar silhouette. Lamps are being lit in windows. Market stalls are being packed away. The cats of Istanbul are stretching, yawning, preparing for their mysterious night shifts. But your day isn't over, not quite. Because tonight, you've been invited somewhere rare. The harem. not the fantasy version painted by bored European artists. This isn't a gauzy room full of reclining dancers and improbable amounts of eyeliner. This is the real domestic, political, and emotional core of palace life, a highly structured, female-governed world of rank, routine, and coffee. You're led through a side entrance and into a quiet corridor where the sound of slippered feet echoes softly. A servant nods to you, then disappears. Another woman gestures silently for you to follow. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. The room you enter smells of rosewater, cloves, and something else. Yes, of course, kava. Women of various ages are seated on silk cushions, some embroidering, some simply sipping, others locked in soft conversation punctuated by sudden bursts of laughter. Trays of sweets glitter in the lamplight: apricots, pistachios, tiny pyramids of candied violets. But all eyes are on the central tray. It's not the snacks that matter, it's the cave. One woman, older, elegant, and clearly in charge, prepares it herself. She does so slowly, precisely, not just out of habit, but as a performance. You realize this isn't just hospitality, it's a test. Because in the harem, coffee wasn't simply a luxury, it was a language. In many Ottoman households, the act of making coffee held layers of meaning. Offering it too quickly could be seen as dismissive. Serving it without sugar might mean disapproval. Serving it with sugar might mean affection or sarcasm, depending on the timing. It's complicated, like feelings. Historians still debate the extent of coffee's role in harem politics. Was it just a relaxing indulgence, or a means of subtle maneuvering? After all, many of the empire's most powerful women lived behind these walls. Mothers of sultans, wives of viziers, and concubines who could out-strategize a room full of bearded advisors. You're handed a cup porcelain, rimmed in gold, impossibly delicate. You nod in thanks, aware that your reaction is probably being studied by at least 4 people. You sip. Perfect. Thick, smooth, balanced, sweet, but not overly so. A hint of cardamom. No, maybe cinnamon. You're too enchanted to analyze. The women smile. You passed. You sit among them, welcomed now, and listen. The conversation is in Turkish, sometimes Arabic, sometimes the kind of code only people who've known each other for decades understand. But you catch pieces. One young woman is telling a story about spilling café on a visiting ambassador's robe. Another counters with a tale of someone who tried to impress the Valide Sultan by serving her café lukewarm. The gasp that follows is nearly operatic. You learn that young women here were taught to brew café as part of their education. Not because men demanded it, but because other women judged it. A poorly brewed cup could doom a first impression. A perfect one. It might open doors you didn't know existed. There's even an old saying whispered across the cushions. A woman who knows how to make café knows how to manage a household. You're not sure how true that is, but it makes everyone nod seriously for about 3 seconds before collapsing into giggles again. In one corner, 2 girls practice their fortune-telling skills, flipping each other's cups, trying to find meaning in the sludge. One sees a swan. The other insists it's a dagger. They agree it might be both, which seems about right. You're offered a second cup. You accept, of course. Always accept the second cup. This one is different. No sugar. Bold, dark, and mysterious. You glance at the woman who handed it to you, and she raises an eyebrow. Message received, she likes you. But she's watching. The harem, for all its quiet luxury, is not soft. It's a chessboard, and café is both pawn and queen. Evening deepens. One woman begins to hum, and another joins in. A small tambourine is passed around. Someone starts drumming with their fingers on a tin tray. The rhythm builds, gentle but insistent, like the simmering of coffee over coal. You feel the warmth of it all, the closeness, the laughter, the layered meaning behind every word and every sip. And you realize that while coffee was seen as a tool of power in the outer world, here it's something more intimate. It's a comfort. It's a ritual. It's a little moment of control in a life that might not offer many. Eventually, you're escorted out the same way you came. Silent halls, sandalwood air, the faint echo of laughter behind you. You carry the scent of kava in your hair, the rhythm of the harem in your steps. Outside, the moon has risen, the lamps flicker, the city sighs. And you think in the Ottoman Empire, power might rest in the palace, but grace lives in the hand that serves the second cup. The stars have taken their places overhead now, scattered like spilled sugar across the night sky. The city is quieter, slower, but still pulsing, still alive. You walk along the edge of the Bosphorus, where the breeze tastes faintly of salt and charcoal, and lamps flicker like sleepy fireflies in distant windows. You're not alone, not really, because tonight you're shadowing a diplomat, one of the Ottoman envoys whose job it was to carry messages, forge alliances, and, more often than not, bring kava with them. That's right, your next cup is international. In the 16th and 17th centuries, as the empire stretched from Hungary to Arabia, Ottoman ambassadors began to bring more than scrolls and official greetings on their journeys. They brought coffee beans, elegant serving trays, and most crucially, the ritual of the brew. You sit on the steps of a guest house where one such envoy is resting before his journey to Vienna. His aides are packing chests with velvet-wrapped porcelain cups, small tins of ground coffee, and silver sesvies polished until you can see your future in them, though not your fortune, that's later. The envoy nods at you, inviting you to join the evening's final kava. No fanfare here, just a quiet moment between dusk and duty. You sip, and it's clear this isn't just about flavor. It's branding. Because the Ottomans didn't just bring beans to Europe, they brought style, presentation, ceremony, the entire idea that coffee should be served a certain way, sipped in a certain posture, shared in specific moments. Historians still argue whether it was a gift of culture or a subtle form of imperial soft power. But one thing's clear, it caught on. In 1650, an Ottoman merchant named Pasqua Rosé opened the first coffee house in England, in Oxford. It was a bit of a novelty at first, a Turkish delight in a land of ale and more ale, but soon it became the seed of Britain's own café boom. Around the same time, coffee houses began popping up in Paris, and Vienna often inspired by Ottoman models. In fact, after the failed Ottoman siege of Vienna in 1683, legend has it that the retreating army left behind sacks of coffee beans. The Austrians, puzzled but intrigued, gave them a try. With the addition of milk and sugar, the Viennese café culture was born. Of course, that story might be apocryphal, or, as historians like to say, delightfully unverified. Still, it's charming to imagine some Viennese baker peering into a sack and saying, "Let's drink it." You take another sip. This batch is floral, delicate, brewed lighter, perhaps in anticipation of European palates. You ask the envoy why coffee matters so much. He raises an eyebrow. "Because it shows who we are," he says, "not by what we conquer, but by what we share." Well, that's a line good enough to embroider on a cushion. Later, as the envoy's caravan prepares to leave, you help load the trays carefully, reverently. Every set has its own design. Some with tulips, some with moons. All elegant, all unmistakably Ottoman. These aren't just cups, they're conversation starters. And the impact of this diplomatic caffeine campaign, it's everywhere. Not just in cafes, but in customs. In France, they called it café à la turque. In Italy, the ibrick became a familiar sight. Even in Russia, where tea eventually dominated. Ottoman-style coffee had its moment, and in each case, the act of drinking kahve carried an exotic whisper of Istanbul, its warmth, its mystery, its careful, velvet-wrapped power. You walk along the Bosphorus again, imagining these ambassadors arriving in foreign cities with trays in hand, preparing coffee for kings and counts who'd never tasted anything like it. The reactions must have ranged from polite sips to wide-eyed obsession. And now, centuries later, that legacy lives on. Every time someone sits down for a cup and calls it Turkish coffee, they're sipping a tiny diplomatic gesture from a very distant empire. The envoy gives you one last nod. His caravan disappears into the night, the hoofbeats rhythmic and calming. You're left on the quiet steps with the last cooling sips of your cup and the faint trace of cardamom in the air. Coffee may not have changed the course of history, but it certainly changed the tone, softened it, sweetened it, gave it a fragrance. And in the Ottoman Empire, that fragrance could travel farther than an army ever could. You wake the next morning not in a palace, nor a merchant's lodge, but in a guest chamber overlooking a small garden filled with pigeons. The air is still cool, the city not yet fully awake. But somewhere nearby, someone is preparing kahve, and you can already tell it's going to be one of those mornings. Today, you've been invited to a formal coffee service. Not the everyday street-side sip or harem-side heart-to-heart, but the imperial protocol version, where kahve is as much performance as it is pleasure. You dress accordingly washed, brushed, and only slightly stained with yesterday's fortune-telling sludge. A young servant meets you outside the courtyard and gestures politely. No words, just practiced movements, each one elegant, restrained. You're brought into a reception chamber, cool marble floors, delicate latticework filtering the light into golden stripes. Cushions of velvet line the edges. Everything smells faintly of cloves, musk, and polished wood. You sit slowly. Everyone does. No one speaks. This is coffee hour, not chatter hour. From a side door, the kahveci basha enters the chief coffee maker to the sultan, or a high-ranking official, depending on whose household you've found yourself in. He's dressed immaculately, robe pressed, slippers quiet, chesve gleaming like a ceremonial sword. He moves with the solemnity of someone who understands that this isn't just a drink, it's a ritual. He bows. The service begins. First, the tray a silver platter with engraved filigree, carrying porcelain cups nestled into golden holders zarf. They're called No One Touches Them. Not yet. The kahveci basha prepares each cup personally. No rushing, no fumbling, water measured, coffee powder spooned in precisely. He sets the sezves over a bed of glowing charcoal and watches closely. The room remains silent. You begin to notice things: the slight twitch of a foot, the careful fold of a napkin, the way people breathe only when absolutely necessary. And when the first cup is poured, the sound barely audible is somehow more commanding than a speech. You receive yours last. The cup is warm, almost hot. The foam sits like a golden brown halo at the top. No sugar. That's a privilege you must earn. You sip. It's humbling, smooth, deep. It coats your tongue in velvet and lingers like an unsolved riddle. You're not sure whether to enjoy it or meditate on it. Someone finally speaks, an older man, seated 2 cushions away. He compliments the foam. That's it. Just the foam. Everyone nods. It's the Ottoman version of a standing ovation. You sip again, carefully. Here, every motion means something. How quickly you drink, whether you finish, whether you look into the cup afterward. There's protocol, posture. You suddenly understand why diplomats trained for this. Historians still argue whether these formal coffee services were mainly displays of refinement or subtle political theater. But most agree that the Ottomans perfected the art of saying everything while appearing to say nothing, one slow sip at a time. This wasn't just etiquette, it was empire maintenance. One tale you overhear later quietly, behind a lattice screen, involves a delegation from Europe. When served their kahve, they asked for sugar and milk. The room froze. The host, ever polite, complied, but the kahveci basha later claimed the sezve wept that day. Coffee here isn't about customization, it's about reverence. You notice that everyone finishes at roughly the same time. The tray is removed, and silence settles again, this time warmer. The rite is complete. Not a drop spilled, not a gesture out of place. And just when you think it's over, a servant re-enters with rosewater for the hands, followed by a small dish of candied quince and mint leaves. A sweet conclusion, not to wash away the kava, but to honor it. You're escorted out just as the breeze begins to move through the latticework again. You glance back once, catching a glimpse of the tray being polished for the next service. Outside, the noise of the city is back. Vendors calling, children chasing chickens, an argument about fish prices gaining real momentum. But you feel different, calmer, straighter, like someone who's passed through a trial you didn't quite realize you were taking. In the Ottoman world, this is what coffee could be, not just drink, not just ritual, but proof of grace under pressure. You walk away quietly, the taste still warm on your tongue, the etiquette carved somewhere deep into your spine. And in that moment, you finally understand anyone can make coffee, but to serve it like an Ottoman, that's something else entirely. The city breathes a little slower now. You can feel it in the rhythm of the breeze, in the softened clang of distant bells, in the way even the street dogs seem less determined. The day is slipping into night, and with it, the tempo of Ottoman life begins to shift once more. You find yourself in a familiar alley near the bazaar. There used to be a coffee house here. A good one. Wooden facade, low cushions, best cardamom blend in 3 districts. It's gone! Shuttered, boards nailed over the windows, a hand-scrawled notice closed by order of the local authority. Unauthorized gatherings. There's even a wax seal, as if that makes it less absurd. This isn't a story of permanent loss, not exactly, just change. Because as coffee grew more entrenched in daily life, it also drew more scrutiny. Again. Always. The empire's relationship with kave has never been linear. It rose, dipped, surged, faded. Coffee houses were praised, banned, reinvented. Sultans cracked down when the chatter got too bold, too rebellious, or simply too noisy near the wrong mosque. And yet, they always came back. You head down the road, following the scent of charcoal in memory, and sure enough, there's another one. Newer, louder, with hookahs bubbling beside the kave cups now, cushions brighter, clientele younger, a little flashier, a little less careful. But it's still there. The sezves, the gossip, the foam. You smile. Inside, the energy feels familiar. Groups of friends, families, even a lone scholar muttering into a stack of paper. Trays clinking, backgammon boards cracking. Someone recites a line of poetry, botches it halfway through, and everyone groans in good humor. You take a seat near the wall. The kave arrives quickly, the server grinning like he knows you've been drinking this stuff since before he was born. It's good, not perfect, but honest. And that's the thing Ottoman coffee culture never really died. It evolved, adapted, found new corners to inhabit. One day it was forbidden. The next, it had royal protection. 1 week, guards shut down the kavehane. The next, a new one opened 2 streets away, this time with better cushions. Historians still argue whether these cycles of suppression and revival weakened or strengthened the tradition. But from your current seat, with your cup warm and steady in your hands, the answer feels obvious. It endured. That's what matters. There's a tale someone tells at your table. An old story, possibly true. Possibly invented late into someone's sixth cup. It goes like this. A coffee house was shut down by decree. The sesvies were confiscated. The beans tossed into the street. But the next morning, when the guards returned, they found a line of regulars seated on the curb with their own cups and tiny braziers, brewing coffee like it was their divine right. No one stopped them. No one dared. You like that story? Whether or not it's true hardly matters. It feels true. The young man beside you pulls a worn book from his satchel and begins to read aloud something romantic, probably exaggerated. Everyone listens politely. Someone offers a correction. They argue gently for a moment. Then someone else, an older man with sharp eyes and a slower voice, recites the original version by heart. Everyone claps once and sips. There it is again, that rhythm. You drink your coffee slowly, watching the room's edges blur just a bit. The laughter, the small debates, the musical way the cups tap against their saucers, it's all deeply familiar, ancient, even when new. Because, while the empire around it shifted, borders redrawn, dynasties replaced, palaces repurposed, Cave stayed steady. It was the country's heartbeat, slow and steady, even in times of upheaval. Eventually, the server returns with a plate of candied walnuts and a second cup. You didn't ask. You don't need to. He just knows. You sip again. The foam's thinner now, the flavor sharper, but it's still Cava. Still Ottoman. Still home. You lean back, letting the warmth of it seep through you. Somewhere down the alley, a cat yowls. The stars peer through a veil of city smoke. The sesvies bubble on. And you realize even in decline, even in reinvention, even in rebirth, coffee didn't just survive the Ottoman Empire. It outlasted it. Night has folded itself gently over the rooftops. The city, now cloaked in shadow and flickering lamplight, exhales. The streets are nearly still, save for the distant shuffle of sandals, the soft clink of metal trays being stacked, and the occasional puff of steam rising from a final sesvi. You make your way back to where it all began, some quiet corner, some familiar breeze, some worn stone courtyard that smells faintly of mint, ash, and memory. You've walked the Empire's coffee trail palace to backstreet, spoon to scandal, fortune to foam. And now, just one last cup. It's waiting for you when you arrive. No ceremony this time, no diplomatic flair, just a simple finjan, nestled in your palms like a tiny hearth. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat, pull your cloak a little tighter, and sip. It's dark, silky, the kind of brew that doesn't announce itself, just arrives. There's no conversation now, no debate, just the rustle of leaves, the soft thrum of insects, and the gentle lapping of the Bosphorus somewhere not far away. This is the true Kavi moment, what the Ottomans called keyif, that state of post-coffee contentment. Not sleepy, not wired, just right, just here. You reflect. On the way, the empire cradled its coffee not just in kitchens, but in its identity, on how it brewed not only beans, but customs, resistance, seduction, quiet power. Even now, with your cup nearly empty, it holds weight, it has presence. Historians still argue whether keyif is something that can be fully translated. Some say it means pleasure, others say bliss. But if you ask the cup in your hand, it says, stay a little longer. And you do. A warm breeze stirs the curtain. A cat, familiar now, pads up and curls beside your feet. Somewhere, a kezve bubbles just once, like a sigh. You think of the Sufi who first chanted through the night with kave keeping time, of the vizier who feared its power, of the harem women who judged with sips, of the backroom rebels, the gossipy uncles, the silver tray diplomats, the sweet-voiced fortune-tellers. All of them here, in your cup. You swirl the last of it. Thick grounds cling to the side like ancient script. But tonight, you're not looking for a message, just a moment. You tip your head back and exhale. The stars are brighter now. The sky is ink. The cup is empty. And it is enough. The city is quiet now. The kind of quiet that feels earned, not absence, but softness. The kind of quiet that knows where you've been and gently pulls a blanket over it. The last embers of charcoal have gone cold. The final trays have been carried away. The streets have emptied, but not forgotten. And somewhere, the memory of a dozen shared cups still lingers in the air, sweet, spiced, bold. You're warm, safe. The breeze is light. Your eyes drift closed, not suddenly, but gradually like a curtain drawn at the end of a long and thoughtful play. The foam has settled. The fortune has spoken. The debates have faded into laughter, and the laughter into hums, and the hums into hush. The cave is gone, but the calm remains. Let your breath slow. Let your limbs soften. You've traveled centuries tonight through palaces and poetry, whispers and warmth, through a world brewed slowly and sipped even slower. There's nothing else you need to do, no final thoughts to chase, no shapes to read at the bottom of the cup. Just let go. Let the rhythm of the empire fade into dreams, the way sesve bubbles fade into stillness. Let your mind steep in still water, rich with memory. You're home. You're full. Sleep now,